Hello dear traveler, welcome once more to our cozy corner of history. Tonight, we embark on a journey into a world gripped by a winter so fierce it could steal your breath at 20 paces. But first, before we plunge into the white wilderness of medieval Europe, I'd love to know, where in the world are you tuning in from? And what hour is it for you right now? Drop your location and time in the comments, and let us form our frozen fellowship. Now, imagine yourself wrapped in layers of wool and fur, standing at the edge of a village green. As the sky darkens to slate, the last ember of sunset has died within the pines, and an icy wind cuts like a knife across your face. Snowflakes begin to drift first, lazily, then in a furious swirl, each one a crystal dagger that stings your cheeks. Farther down the road, the hollow sound of a frozen stream, cracking echoes through the trees, and you shiver at the thought of thin ice giving way beneath your boots. In this era, long before central heating or snug, weatherproof walls, winter was not a season, but a siege. In every thatch-roofed cottage, low wooden door frames rattled under gusts that seemed determined to wrench them open. The smoke from evening fires clawed its way out through thatch and timber, only to be swallowed by the frosty air. By dusk, each household was a cluster of huddled figures, a family of 6 perhaps, perched on benches, close enough to feel each other's breath, desperate for the smallest flicker of warmth. And yet, before this nightmare of bone-chilling cold became the norm, life was different. Centuries earlier, people welcomed snow as a gentle blanket tan, expected neighbors' arrival marking the season's orderly dance. But then, around the 1300s, skies darkened in a very different sense, ushering in the Little Ice Age. Temperatures plummeted, winters lengthened. What had been a tolerable inconvenience turned into relentless peril. Let me paint you a picture of that first fateful winter. Fields once golden with barley were now hollow bowls of ice. Rabbits and foxes left only ghostly tracks on the snow. Even the crows vanished, leaving villages eerily silent. The creak of cartwheels on frozen ruts was replaced by the distant howl of wolves, emboldened by hunger to venture closer to human settlements. Smoke from chimneys served as faint beacons and the white haze signals of life in a world rapidly turning ghostly. Inside, the struggle for warmth was a daily ordeal. Imagine piling log upon log into stone hearths so large they could roast an ox, only to have the flames snuffed out by swirling drafts. Sparks would fly upward into the chimney's throat, and one misstep could set the rafters alight. Another deadly danger in a season already brimming with threats. You would huddle with your children, whispering legends of fire spirits that once danced among logs, hoping their magic might revive the embers. And yet, amid that savage beauty, there existed a spark of wonder. On clear nights, the stars seemed impossibly clothed, so bright against the velvet darkness that you could almost count their frozen sparkles. The cold air felt electric, every inhale sharp and alive. In those moments, some found exhilaration. The world was distilled to a shelter community. But excitement alone would not keep you alive. As the first snow drifted into high banks, you realized this was no mere season but a crucible. In the coming months, every breath, every scrap of food, every whispered prayer would determine whether you survived or slipped beneath winter's icy tide. The Little Ice Age's frozen grip and the Great Frost of 1709. The wind that howls outside your window tonight was but a whisper compared to the gale that swept across Europe in the depths of the Little Ice Age. Imagine waking one dawn to a world transformed. Your fields once green with promise now lay, buried under a blanket of ice so thick that sunlight glanced off it like polished silver. The roof of your cottage groaned under the weight of snow, and every breath you exhaled turned to thin smoke in the frigid air. Over decades, winters grew longer and summers shorter. Rivers that once flowed gently past market towns froze solid, offering people the surreal chance to set up bakeries and ale stalls on the Thames itself. Yet this spectacle came at a terrible cost. Fish vanished beneath the ice, bridges cracked, and barge traffic ground to a halt. In many regions, spring arrived and then retreated, leaving farmers baffled as fledgling shoots froze and died. By the early 1700s, climatologists today would point to volcanic eruptions and shifting ocean currents. Medieval chroniclers could only watch in awe and dread. The greatest of these winters struck in 1709. On New Year's Day, a bitter north wind blew through Europe, and temperatures plummeted to a record low. Estimates suggest as much as 14 degrees Fahrenheit, colder than the preceding decade's average. In Paris, the Seine became an avenue of ice. Merchants laid boards atop the frozen water and hawked oysters to pass. Who bundled against the cold in fur-lined cloaks? Candlelit stalls sold roasted chestnuts that steamed in the frosty air, and children skated where ships once sailed. Yet, beneath the jovial veneer, suffering lurked. That winter, France's wheat harvest had already been poor, and what little grain remained was locked inside granaries sealed beneath yards of snow. In the English countryside, entire harvests failed. Farmers who had stored seed from the previous year watched in horror as it sprouted underground only to be smothered by frost. Sheep huddled in agonized silence on the hillsides, their bleats lost in the howling storm. Those with the means burned precious oak and beech in their hearths to stay alive. The poor scraped together whatever driftwood or animal dung they could find, stoking smoky fires that offered a fleeting warmth before collapsing into embers. And famine followed swiftly. Villagers who had once celebrated Michaelmas with full bellies now gnashed their teeth in desperation. Pottage pots ran dry. Families resorted to eating their draft animals, the very horses and oxen they needed to plow spring fields. In some regions, the ravenous turned to foraging for tree bark and nettles, while others claimed to eat mice, dogs, even the leather from their boots, boiled in salt water. Disease stalked them like a second winter. Pneumonia and dysentery found easy victims among the gaunt and weakened. In cramped hovels, the sick coughed into the frozen gloom, and relief was scant. Monasteries overflowed with the ill. Their crude infirmaries could offer little more than lukewarm broth and herbal. Many monks fell ill alongside their wards, leaving entire villages reliant on neighbors to haul firewood and water in cruelly slippery conditions. Imagine a young mother named Eleanor, her cheeks sunken with cold, cradling a feverish infant against her chest. She knows that if the baby's fever breaks in the night, there are no medicines to turn to, only faith, and the faint hope that the monks at the local abbey have a spare blanket. Or picture a grizzled farmer, Jacob, who stumbles back from the frozen woods with an armful of kindling, only to find his barn doors iced shut. He is faced with a heartbreaking choice: break through his last supply of winter oats to hammer open the doors, or leave the animals starving through the night. Amid such misery, a strange exhilaration flickered in some hearts. Hunters braved the storm to chase desperate wolves across fields of white, returning with pelts that fetched high prices in town. Adventurers skated across the broad rivers, their laughter trailing like music across the ice, as if to defy winter itself. And those who knew the arcane arts claimed that the frost carried messages, patterns, and the snow whispered secrets of the seasons to those who would listen. Yet for most, the winter of 1709 was a bitter memory etched in pain and loss. When spring finally crept back first, as a trickle of warmth, then, a tentative green at the hedgerow sit was celebrated with a fervor unmatched in living memory. Church bells rang from dawn to dusk. People danced barefoot on the muddy ground in thankfulness. They named it the Spring of Deliverance, vowing never again to take the sun's warmth for granted. That same spirit of defiance is what sustained medieval minds through a century of brutal winters. The belief that in enduring the worst, they forged something indomitable within themselves. The storms might howl, the ice might crack beneath their feet, but when spring's first crocus dared to bloom, they knew their resilience had prevailed. Rituals of survival, misrule, and communal hearth as the brutal grip of frost tightened. Medieval communities turned to ancient rituals and shared customs as small beacons of warmth in a world turned white. The most raucous of these was the feast of St. Stephen, held each December 26th, from the moment dawn's pale light crept over the frozen fields. A palpable buzz swept through villages, and plowmen alike donned motley hats stitched with holly and ivy, while the church bell tolled its call to gathering. With trumpets and drums borrowed from idlemen, a humble peasant chosen by lot was crowned lord of misrule, his paper crown barely large enough to sit atop a woolen coif. For one glorious day, he wielded the scepter of laughter. He declared that coats be swapped for festive tunics, that supper tables groan under the weight of roasted geese and spiced pies, and that proper lords bow to their lowless serfs. In candlelit halls, tables were laden with steaming bowls of wassail-hot spiced ale, studded with apples, its fragrant steam curling through the rafters. Mummers' plays, performed by masked villagers, reenacted tales of St. George and the dragon in broad, slapstick strokes, while even the crustiest elder might chuckle at the shepherd's pratfalls. For one brief day, hierarchy dissolved. Every man and woman was equal in flesh and laughter, but misrule's sweetness was balanced by the more solemn pageantry of religious observance. On Christmas Eve, families walked the mile to the parish church, their torches flickering against the ice. In the hush that fell before midnight, the priest intoned the first carol in Latin, the words rising in the vaulted darkness, like sacred smoke. Candles placed in each window glowed like distant stars, warding off the malevolent spirits believed to wander the frozen night. Young and old knelt in straw-strewn aisles to receive the blessing of holy water, praying for protection through the months ahead. Throughout winter, church attendance was not simply an act of devotion, but a lifeline. The churchyard acolytes collected coal and driftwood donations, hauling them through drifts to the poor. Monasteries kept their gates open to travelers stranded by snow, while abbots dispatched brother carriers to deliver blankets and broth to the sick. In some regions, the wealthy commissioned soul cakes, small rounds of sweet bread distributed door to door, in a ritual known as souling, where children and the infirm sang hymns in exchange for sustenance. Beyond church walls, neighbors practiced a silent pact of mutual aid. When one family's fire dwindled to embers, the children of another might sneak over at dawn, placing armfuls of kindling at the cottage door. During blizzards, so fierce the wind howled like wolves at the window, parties of young men braved the whiteout to check on elderly widows breaking ice on wells and propping open barn doors stiff with frost. In return, the grateful offered homemade cheese, smoked fish, or a handful of barley for the traveler's horse. These unseen acts wove a net of support that often meant the difference between life and death. Winter nights, long and merciless, also became the cradle of storytelling. Around communal fires stacked high with peat, in northern reaches families huddled under heavy blankets, faces lit by dancing flames. Elders recounted tales of frost giants who dwelt in the high crags of children stolen by snow wraiths, to vanish forever in the white lands beyond. Younger voices added new chapters, weaving in current fears. A wolf pack thicker than a man's arm. A plague that crept through the village like a second winter. By candlelight, these stories bound listeners together in fear and wonder, forging a shared resilience against the dark. Even the most private moments were marked by small ceremonies. Before breaking fast each morning, families paused in silence to sprinkle a little flour on the threshold, an old charm, said to confuse the devil slipping in through cracks. In the stillness before dawn, women drew sigils on the pantry door, symbols of protection passed down from grandmothers who faced even fiercer chills without faith or fire. These quiet rites, unrecorded by chroniclers, testified to the medieval heart's determination to persevere. And then there was music. The haunting drone of hurdy-gurdies, echoing through snow-washed lanes. The plucked strings of lutes played in castle antechambers to soothe anxious the lilting hymns of wandering clerics, whose voices carried like warmth on the wind. Even in the depths of the coldest nights, a single fluted melody could melt the frost from a soul. So, while winter might strip the land bare cutting crops, silencing rivers, and tempting despair, it also revealed the profound bonds of community, faith, and ingenuity. Between the chaos of misrule and the solemn hush of chapel pews, medieval souls found flickers of joy, sparks of compassion, and the enduring power of story to light their path through the frost. Thawing, hope, and the triumph of Plough Monday at last. After what felt like an eternity beneath winter's iron rule, the world began to stir. One morning, you wake to birdsong so thin, it almost doesn't register until you realize the faint trill of a lark, drifting on a breeze that carries no bite. The air, though still crisp, no longer cuts like a knife. It merely brushes your cheek with a soft reminder that change is afoot. In the head, you spot the first promise of green, a solitary snowdrop pushing its fragile white bloom through the thawing earth. Villagers hurry to each other's doors with breathless news. The first crocus has bloomed. As if it were a sacred omen, fields once glazed in, ice now glisten with rivulets of meltwater, carving miniature canyons in the soil. Farmers, long idle, gather in small groups to inspect their plowshares, wiping away rust with coarse clods. On the first Monday, after Epiphany Plough Monday, they assemble in procession. Oxen and horses decked in hastily woven garlands of evergreens. The plows themselves draped with ribbons and bells that tinkle in the warming breeze. A priest blesses the furrow with holy water, tracing its line in the dark earth as villagers kneel in muddy furrows, heads bowed in gratitude. The plowshare bites into the ground with a soft crunch, upturning the first clods that will cradle the season's seed. Laughter and song break out as wagers are made. Whose clod will fly highest? Whose team will pull the straightest furrow? Children chased one another through the soggy fields, lifting handfuls of rich loam and flinging it in gleeful arcs. Women carry steaming mugs of ale and bowls of pottage to share simple fare after months of meager porridge, and even the most stoic laborers crack wide smiles as they sip the hearty broth. In castle courtyards, nobles throw open their great doors, inviting peasants to feast on honeyed cakes and spiced wine, a gesture of solidarity born from the recognition that every level of society depends upon the earth's generosity. As dusk falls, lanterns bob down country lanes, guiding weary hands back to hearth and home. The fields rest under a blanket of promise, and the world feels poised on the brink of new life. You tuck your boots by the door, your heart warmed, not just by the fire that awaits inside, but by the knowledge that, together, you have defied winter's longest siege. Now, we're going to talk about some really dark stuff today. And if you want to support the work we do here, which makes sure that this dark stuff doesn't happen to people anymore, you can head over to our support page. We'll put a link in the description below. The rain fell cold and relentless, each drop an icicle on skin, urging the villagers to huddle deeper into their homes. Catherine pressed against the cold stone wall, her thin shawl offering scant defense against the November wind that whistled through the gaps in the wattle and deep. This bleak midwinter's day in 1315 mirrored countless others across a frozen Europe. The year before, a scorching summer had yielded a bountiful harvest, lulling communities into complacency. But then winter arrived with the fury of an avenging god, unleashing frost so unrelenting It seemed the sun itself had fled the heavens. For months, the icy grip tightened, turning rivers to glass, burying farmlands under frozen shroud and silencing birdsong, as feathered friends perished or flew south. In England, King Edward II looked on helplessly, as his pleas for divine intervention went unanswered. As the weeks stretched into an ordeal that would come to be known as the Great Frost, his subjects suffered. Root cellars ran dry. Stockpiled grain dwindled. Hunger gnawed at bellies, forcing families to sell their meager belongings. Abandoned livestock too weak to move and turned to the riverbanks to supplement their diets with fish. But fish did not fatten. Farmers could not sow seeds in hard-pan soil. Spring planting, the lifeblood of medieval agriculture, was gravely threatened. Farmers were already reporting that their wheat fields would fail to sprout. When February came and the Thames froze over, even Londoners realized their stores could not withstand a siege. Residents abandoned cats and dogs to become hunters and hares. A contemporary chronicler described mothers so desperate they cooked the leather off old shoes and fed them to their infants. As March wore on, more and more corpses began to appear in the streets. One preacher estimated he buried 24 bodies a day in the English capital alone. London, with its wealth and proximity to fishing grounds, fared better than many. Yet death painted a grim masterpiece there too. Its brushstrokes varied. Some died suddenly, collapsed in the street. Others withered away, unable to muster the energy to rise from their beds. Children succumbed beside their parents, sometimes 2 in a night. Victims often experienced a hacking cough, bloody noses, and eyes that poured forth streams of pus. Then they would expire in convulsions, their limbs contorted, fingernails and hair falling out. Those who survived the physical ordeal faced a long recovery, their lungs forever damaged. By April, with temperatures plummeting to 17 degrees Fahrenheit, few dared leave their homes. Parish churches saw a surge in confessions as terror took hold. On April, the Friday before Easter, a knight wrote home of how he and his fellows were, quote, so sore hurt with cold that there was never man in such plight, that might well wield sword or spear. 4 days later, Queen Isabella of France and 2 of her children died, succumbing to the same fate as countless others who had failed to escape the clutches of the frost. Just for months into the new year, an estimated 25% of England's population lay dead. Those fortunate enough to survive emerged into a transformed world. Throughout the countryside, skeletal figures emerged from their homes, their hollow eyes gazing sightlessly at the ground. Entire villages had vanished, abandoned by families in search of dwindling stores elsewhere. Fields lay untilled, and livestock wandered freely, having escaped or been left to die. But life must go on, my little chimney pots. The long, dark winter might be ending, but a new one is inevitable, and you are alive. For now, that's something to celebrate, isn't it? All across medieval Europe, survival of the winter meant that the living had to try and get back to normal. But what did that look like after such cataclysmic loss? What kind of year did they have to make it through? Well, like every age, medieval Europe had plenty of problems. And what I mean by that is giant honking problems, like famine, war, disease, rampant inflation, the collapse of trade networks, and witches. Don't forget the witches. They were also a problem, but in the wake of such devastation, the survivors had to find ways to rebuild, to get on with life in the shadow of what had been lost. And like every age, they solved these problems in different ways. Sometimes they turned to religion for answers, sometimes to science, and sometimes they just turned to fun. The holiday season was always a time of indulgence in medieval Europe. In many ways, it provided a release valve for a society constrained by rigid rules and hierarchies. No other time of year allowed commoners to approach their betters so casually. People dressed up as hairy wild men and chased maidens through the streets. They sang bawdy songs, made merry, and shed decorum like a discarded cloak. Most famously, they celebrated the arrival of Christmas with the Lord of Misrule, an inversion of social order in which servants became masters and masters became servants. But while the Lord of Misrule was usually a figure of fun, sometimes he was a harbinger of real change. During the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, for instance, Wat Tyler and his fellow rebels placed a Lord of Misrule on the London throne, John Baugh, the radical preacher, drawing attention to the grievances of the poor. After all, in a society so teetering on the edge of chaos that its very foundations were crumbling beneath its feet, perhaps a little upheaval wasn't such a bad thing. As the 14th century wore on, the Black Death claimed an estimated 30 to 50% of the population, leading to profound social and economic changes. Serfdom was effectively abolished in England. With fewer people to work the land, the surviving peasants bargained for higher wages. Trade and manufacturing guilds, crippled by the loss of members, relaxed entry requirements, and women found new opportunities in the workplace. For centuries, the church had taught that widows and spinsters should avoid spinning, because it was unbecoming of their sex. Now, in the aftermath of the plague, these restrictions disappeared. In a workforce suddenly short of hands, women took over the spinning wheel and loom. In northern Italy, spinning and weaving guilds, once dominated by male weavers, opened their ranks to female apprentices and journeymen. In England, the number of women weavers increased dramatically. But why? Why does disaster lead to opportunity? Why does havoc pave the way for advancement? Because in the ashes of the old, the seeds of the new are sown. That is the law of nature and of humanity. And when that happens, you can celebrate. Let's rewind to 16th century Germany. The Protestant Reformation has just dealt the Holy Roman Empire a fatal blow. Now Christians are free to worship as they please, or at least they will be in time. For now, though, they're busy clearing snow. A harsh winter has blanketed Nuremberg in drifts, and people are dying of exposure, starvation, and plague. Officials estimate that between December 1524 and March 1525, nearly half of Nuremberg's population perished. As spring approached, citizens staggered out of their homes, gaunt and pallid, ready to confront the coming summer, which promised relief from the bitter cold but threatened famine and pestilence. To gird themselves against hunger, the townspeople observed a curious tradition known as Plough Monday, which marked the beginning of planting season. Originating in paganism, the custom involved a procession to the fields carrying a decorated plough and singing and dancing. Over time, Christian customs fused with pagan roots to produce a unique festival. A priest blessed the furrows of the fields and farmers raced their plows, competing for prizes awarded by judges perched atop a tower. This blend of the sacred and the humorous lightened the mood and reminded Nurembergers of the connection that united them, the land they cultivated, and the God they revered. After such devastation, such loss, such uncertainty about the future, they needed something to anchor them, something to remind them of what had come before and what they needed to do to survive. And when spring came, they brought out the plow. You see, even in the depths of winter, life endured. Even as families struggled to stay alive, tiny shoots pushed through frozen ground. Robins huddled together for warmth, and foxes denned with their prey. The cycle of nature continued regardless of human anguish. And people learned to tune in again. They tracked animal migrations, recorded the phases of the moon, and the movements of the stars. They studied rainfall and temperature. They watched the delicate dance of ice formation, and from these rhythms, they pieced together a narrative of hope, a testament to life's tenacity, and a reminder that even after the harshest winter, spring would inevitably follow. And so we find ourselves back in the cozy confines of our own winter, safe from the biting winds of history. But as we sip our hot cocoa or curl up by the fire, let's not forget the legacy of those who faced winters far more merciless than our own. They fought for every breath, for every morsel of food, for every glimmer of hope. They shared their hearts, their food, their stories, and in doing so, they forged a bond that echoed through the ages. The spirit of togetherness, of communal aid, of finding joy amidst adversity, that's the real warmth they left behind. In this winter, let that warmth envelop you. Embrace the beauty of the season. Reach out to those in need. Share a smile, lend a helping hand, and carry the torch of hope forward. As you do, you'll find that the winter, no matter how harsh, loses its sting, and the human spirit, aglow with kindness and resilience, shines ever bright. Thank you for journeying through these chronicles of medieval winter. With me, may their strength be your solace and their resilience your inspiration. Until next time, stay warm in body and spirit, and may the promise of spring sustain you always.